Hello internet, and today's gonna be a book tag. I know, wow, what? She's doing something that most classic booktubers do, but she never does because she never films. Yes, I know. So I was tagged in this back in August. Wow, such a long time ago. I am so behind on everything. What a surprise. But I was tagged to do this by Book Flinch. She is an amazing person. I highly suggest you go check out her channel. It will be linked down below, and to go watch her take on this tag. The tag is the Who Am I book tag, created by PBS Digital Studios in conjunction with The Great American Read. So now we're gonna get started. So the first question is, if your life was a genre, what genre would it be? Alright, my life's not really exciting, nothing much happens in it, but I would like to say my life would at least be entertaining to someone. I don't want it to be a boring book. Likelihood is it was going to be a contemporary, like literally nothing magical happens in my life, unless you count all the magic that I introduced to it by reading all these books. So I would want my life, I think the genre my life is a Frederick Bachman contemporary book. Specifically him, not any contemporary book, a Frederick Bachman contemporary book, because he has this real talent for making a very, very mediocre life seem so interesting. Just his take on it, the way he introduces characters, the way he introduces their personalities, their thoughts, their feelings, everything ends up making a rather average, mediocre life seem really, really fun and enjoyable. So like, if you are used to his books, A Man Called Uwe, just about an old dude being old, like that's literally the whole book. Britt Marie Was Here, about an old woman getting a job in a new town to get a little bit more excitement in her life. My grandmother told me to say she was sorry. It was a really long title. All of it's going to be right here. About a young girl dealing with the death of her grandmother, but also learning more about the people in the apartment complex she lives, and so on and so forth. Particularly, there's also Beartown and Us Against You. Those are not as heartwarming. Very important reads, but not as heartwarming and comedic as the other ones, because it deals with some pretty dark and serious topics. So it's a lot more serious for those books. Very necessary, very good, a lot more serious. So I think I would like mine to be more like My Grandmother Told You, because My Grandmother Told Me, because in that one it's like just basic average life, but because the story is told from the point of view of a young 7-year-old who had this game with her grandmother where they made up a fanciful place. A lot of in between chapters are just about this girl thinking about this fantasy land, this fantasy place, just helping herself cope with the loss of her best friend, her grandmother. So I think it would be more like that, where it's just like, she goes to work, blah blah blah, and it kind of be mediocre but entertaining, and then maybe a random chapter where it's just like just me imagining some weird thing, because that happens more often than not. So it still has that little bit of magical feel, while also really just being about a boring person leading a rather boring life. If I had a wish for which genre I wish my life would be like, I wish it was like a portal fantasy, and I was like hopping in and out of like different worlds, or just even one different world other than ours. Like a portal fantasy might be my wish for what genre I wish my life was. Question number 2. What villain from what book do you most identify with? I like a lot of villains, but I don't think I identify with a lot of them, simply because like I'm very lazy. So let's see which one. Megamind. I know like he's not from a book, but Megamind was a villain for the first half. I identify with him. Like sometimes I don't do so great and fail a lot as a villain, but and Tome Riddle is my favorite villain, but I don't identify with him. I just really like his character. Let's see. I can think of protagonists and kind of anti-heroes, but a villain specifically. Now I'm just gonna look at my shelves because I couldn't think of. Uprooted by Naomi Novik. The villain in that, The Woods, I identify with that character. Yeah, that's the villain I identify with. I can't tell you why or how, because that's kind of a spoiler. But The Woods and the villain there, I like that one. I think that's the closest. But you'll understand why. Villains aren't usually the thing that I identify with. I do enjoy villains. I love villains. I think they're great. But I can't think one of them that I identify with. But I do severely identify with anti-heroes and anti-villains and overall characters who are kind of stuck in between and they're just like sort of assholes, which kind of goes with the next question number 3, a protagonist you're most similar to, and that is going to be Elliot from In Other Lands by Sarah Reese Brennan. I am most like Elliot. Like, me and Elliot are probably the same person. Elliot is a little more blunt and abrasive, and has a little less control of his brain to mouth filter than I do, but I swear I think all the same things this kid says out loud half of the time. Like, I understand exactly where this kid is coming from, and it's probably why I don't have a lot of friends and most people do not like me in person, is because I tend to be abrasive like that fairly often. So yeah, that Elliot is me and I am Elliot. Yeah, I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing that I identify so closely to his character, but I'm gonna take it as a good thing, because at the end of the day, neither one of us are bad people. We're just sort of assholes. That's it. Question number 4. Which book did you connect to the most in your past, but that you do no longer? I don't know. I don't have any of my childhood books here. I guess one that I really connected to as a kid and really loved as a kid, where nowadays I'm more distant from it, and I still love it, but more distance, is gonna be Harry Potter. I love Harry Potter, and I'm not saying this to be down on it or anything like that, but Harry Potter is a book I read several times. It is a book I still love and obsess about, but I think nowadays it's not so much the story itself that really has my love of Harry Potter. Like, I still think that the 7 books are phenomenal. I think what keeps me going now with the Harry Potter fandom isn't that story in itself, but all the different parallel universes and timelines you can take off of that story. So all the fan fictions and fan canons and all of that sort of stuff, and the fanon, and all the inventive ways that people have portrayed and recharacterized the characters. I think I love that more than I love the actual series, and I really love the actual series. So I think I really strongly identified with that series as a kid. I read it a lot. I perfected my British accent by listening to the audiobooks often. I used to just quote random lines because I listened to the audiobooks so often. I swear my grandparents only know me by that kid who read Harry Potter so many times, because that's literally all I ever did. And nowadays, I haven't reread the books in so long. I swear I remember every single word by word, because of how many times I've read it. But nowadays, it's not so much that story of how it is, but how it could be, or how it exists in other people's heads that I identify with. Not so much the original, but the influence the original has had on people and their minds and stuff like that, if that makes sense. Other than that, a book that I really liked as a kid that I now kind of just despise is Cinder. When the Cinder Lunar Chronicles were first starting and Cinder first came out, I read that book because my aunt had bought it for me, and I absolutely enjoyed it. I was in love. I was like, oh, where's the second book? I need the second book right away. This and that. And so because of that love, I decided to actually reread Cinder and finally read the second book, even though I have owned it since forever and a half. And I guess I don't know what I saw. I think I was just an idiot. I was a lot more forgiving as a kid. That's kind of where I'm getting at. I was a lot more forgiving. So a lot of things on my reread of Cinder, which I had basically forgotten, like I'd forgotten most of the book, and then my read of Scarlet was just like, this was stupid. I don't know why I ever liked this ever. Like, it wasn't good. And I'm surprised at myself for liking that book, or at least being as excited for that book as I was. Like, I don't want to say it's bad, but like, I was a pretty like picky reader even as a kid, in the sense that there was a lot of things that irritated me, because like at that same time I was reading Twilight, I read the Mortal Instruments and the Clockwork Princess series, and like a lot of those books as well, and I don't like those books. I mean, Twilight I'm okay with, okay? I read Twilight, I didn't mind it. I didn't think it was like spectacular, and I wasn't fangirl crazy, but it was okay. But like, I hated Mortal Instruments, and I hated, like, I just hated Cassandra Clare books, and just like, there was a lot of books that were in that same realm of Cinder that I just that have the exact same problems with them, that I saw all those problems and I was like, garbage. But for Cinder, for some reason, like, all those problems slipped through the cracks for me, and I just remember like being really psyched about that book. But like, now I'm just like, garbage. Like, how did I ever think this was decent? It's like, okay, it's not good, but it's okay. Question number 5. What is a recent book read that you would most likely want to be in? Ooh, let me see. What are the books that I read most recently? I have a list of them. Oh, I would want to be in the world of Thisbe Thestop and the Black Mountain. I think that would be a really, really cool world to live in. That book is about a young girl who is the what is it called? The keeper of a dungeon. So there is this huge mountain, and in this mountain there's different levels, and it's just a dungeon, like a fighting dungeon, right? Like you would see in like MMO games and like fantasy games, where you go into a dungeon and each level you go down, monsters get tougher and shit like that. So she takes care of, and is the caretaker of one of those dungeons, and making sure that the monsters are okay and they're being fed and they're being taken care of and stuff like that. And I just found that world so fascinating. I don't want to live in the dungeons or even fight in the dungeons, but I did like that that was just a common concept, to have all these monsters and creatures in it, and it be a fantasy land, and this young girl being taken care of, that I think it would be really exciting to see the rest of the world, which this book is getting a sequel, and it sounds like you might get to see what happens outside of the dungeon and what exists outside of it. So I think at the moment that would be my most recent read for a book that I want to go to. And by the time I'm filming this, I read that book 7 days ago, and I've read a couple books in between. So yeah, that book. Let's see. Let's go back. What was the next question? Number 6, how do your reading habits show off your personality? Okay. First, I think my reading habits tend to show that, one, I'm really, really interested in fiction and the make-believe and just fantasy and just things that aren't the norm. I think every single book that I own has some sort of magical, spectacular twist to it. I mean, there's a few bare to the bones, very, very, very normal fantasies, but I think most of the books that I own always have a characteristic that shows us that life is more interesting than it seems. It's more magical. There's more action and adventure to it. So I have books that have that across genres, because I have both sci-fi and contemporary and magical realism and fantasy and books that are sort of fantasy and sci-fi at the same time. Honestly, as long as it's fiction and feeds into some sort of adventure, fantastic thing about life, I tend to have it on my shelves and I tend to read it. I also think that based on the way that I review and the things that annoy me about books versus the things I appreciate about books really tells what type of person I am. I tend to be really short-tempered and really exasperated by characters who I don't think are doing obvious things, who aren't inventive with their way of thinking. I think that's the thing that I usually complain about most, is when characters or the authors of the books aren't being as creative as they could be. So basically, I highly value creativity and action, adventure, and fantasy and fiction and magic. And my biggest problems with any books that I own, and the books that I'm least likely to own, or the books that I'm most likely to put on my I hate you shelf, are those who are not as creative and inventive and aren't as outside of the box as they could be. And I think my personality is shown through that. I think I'm very clear about that. I think, yeah, it's all in the subtext there. And number 7. What a book taught me something about myself. What one book taught me something about myself? I don't know. I don't know. I can't think of a single book. You want to know why? Because I learned something from every book, and that's super cheesy, but it's true. I used to have this belief as a kid, and I kind of still hold it. As a kid, I had to read a lot of library books because we couldn't always be buying books. My mother, fortunately enough, did spend money on me and buying me books that I did accrue a pretty decent collection. Even though we didn't have that much money, she was very supportive in the fact that I loved reading and would cater to my reading needs. So I did own a lot of books, but because we didn't have a lot of money, I read just as many library books. And I had a tendency to judge books by the cover, because that's what fucking covers are for, because that's the point of the covers. Like, the cover designers are meant to design the cover so people can judge what type of book and genre and story it's going to be based on the cover. That's the whole point of the fucking cover. It's the whole point of the cover. But I used to have a tendency to go through and be like, oh, this book looks interesting, but I would put it back, and then I'd go through and find another book. But like maybe months down the line, a book that I was kind of meh about, I would finally pick it up and read, and at that point in time in my life, that was the book that I needed. I always found that really interesting, that books that I was so completely uninterested in before, I would come back to months later and it would end up being a great book and the book that I needed for the time in my life that I was going through. So I still kind of feel that way. That's why I never really get mad when I don't complete my TBR or I have a large one, because I kind of feel like there's always going to be some book that comes into your life when you need it most. So for example, We Are the Ants by Sean David Hutcherson. I found that at a used bookstore. It was $5. I bought it. I didn't read it for a while, and then one day I just picked it up. And I was in college and I read it, and it was the book that I needed. It showed me that I'm not alone in the way that I think and that I feel, and that there can be other people who are having the same sort of depression and mental issues that I am, and are thinking thoughts in the same way. Because I really struggled with trying to not so much confront the fact that I was going through depression, but to explain the fact that the depression I was going through did not match what I had heard from other people when they explained, like, hey, I'm sad for this. This is like what's going on with myself, with my body, what's going on with me. I had never matched any of that. So I could never call it depression because I didn't think it was, because I was like, oh, but everybody else's sound different. They all sound like this, and that's not how I feel. I feel like this. So when I read We Are the Ants, it just really, it helped me, okay? It helped me see that it's okay that I call it what I wish to call it, because it is in that realm, even though it's not what all the people I've talked to, that's not their same thoughts when they are going through mental health breaks, right? Not breaks, but like moments where your mental health is your weakest. They don't have the same weakness as me. They think of things differently, and that's okay, and that I'm not alone in that, and that there are other people who have the same problems as me and think of them in similar ways as me. And that was important. And like In Other Lands was important to me because it was just like seeing a character who could be a protagonist while also like being me. Like, because for the longest time, I think that's why the importance of having a character that represents you is so important in media and in books. Because when I was reading books at the time, not that these books didn't exist that could talk about me, because I found like there were a lot of books that did, but it was hard to me to find middle grade books about kids of color, for one, and then kids who were overweight or just felt like they were. I don't think I ever really was, but the way that people always talked to me and the way that they always talked about me always made me feel like I was super fat. Like, honestly, I never was. Like, when I look back at my pictures, I was like, I never was. Why did everyone make me feel that way and make me think that I was just some humongous ogre? Like, I don't understand. Like, why did you make me feel like that? I have no idea. But they did. So I never had a lot of books that were like popular, well available at the libraries that had characters that talked about me and showed me being the hero in stories and represented me. And I had to find other ways to identify with the heroes I read with. But like In Other Lands was kind of about a smart alecky kid who hates exercise, wasn't really good at it, but ended up just through his, even though he was abrasive, just because he still did care about people and he still could make friends despite his abrasiveness. And his abrasiveness did not mean that he lacked caring. And because of it, sometimes it meant he saw how to help and how to care more than the people around him, and that him being kind of a lazy smartass was okay and actually helped him be the protagonist that the world needed. And so that's just sort of like, those are two books that mean a lot to me, and two books that I identified with. And I just think at the end of the day, the books that change you most as a person are not necessarily the books that make you think differently, but the books that help you realize that you're less alone and that you have just as much of a chance and an opportunity to be the protagonist and the hero in a story as anybody else. Because while it's really easy to identify with tons of main characters, a lot of the time those main characters don't feel like you. So it's always really great to find those main characters who you can say, that is me. Like, you know, as kids, how you used to joke, oh, I'm Sailor Moon. Like, you know, me and my friends used to do that all the time. I'm Sailor Jupiter. Like, you know, shit like that. I think that as kids, as adults, just as humans in general, we still want to have that main character, that protagonist, that hero of the adventure, the chosen one, the savior of them all, that we can actually see ourselves as. Because we're not all going to be Harry Potter, and we're not all going to be the chosen one, but we like to see protagonists that can actually be us, that we actually are similar to them. So while we can identify, and kind of the point of a lot of protagonists is for us to self-insert, I think it's really hard to find that perfect self-insertion where you actually see your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions the way you would handle a decision portrayed in a character, because you're kind of a unique human being. So it's really hard. My point is, it's really hard, and the books that mean the most to me, and I think to a lot of people, are the books in which the main character is most similar to themselves in actuality, not just someone that they can resonate with, but someone who is, by their own definition of what they see themselves as, a basic carbon copy of them. Yeah. I think I just made that a lot more deep and confusing than it was necessary for a tag question, but you know what? I did it. So, if you liked this, I guess give all those bunnies a click down below. If you want to do this tag, feel free to. If you feel it necessary that you be tagged by someone so that you can do it, you can just say, I tagged you. But thank you, the Book Finch, for tagging me. Again, go check her out down below. She's a really lovely human being, and goodbye, Internet.